Hello everyone, I'm David here with ExcelPhysics, here to show you guys how to build the plasma speaker kit. So here on the table we have everything that you'll get in your kit. As you see, you have your case, your power supply, flyback, and your circuit board. Now the case comes with a thin protective layer of a sticker paper transfer paper to prevent burn stains during laser cutting. So when you get them, you want to peel off all the transfer paper, and also remove any leftover pieces from the holes after cutting. And to build your plasma speaker, you'll need a few tools, some wire cutters, clippers, wire stripper. A helping hand is very useful, holding the board for you when you're soldering things together. You'll definitely need a soldering iron, and preferably one that comes with a brass cleaner. You also want a Phillips head screwdriver, some solder, and also a magnifying glass, which is really helpful for identifying parts and parts numbers. So yeah, let's get started. So now we'll do all the other assembly later, and we're going to start with soldering the circuit board parts onto the circuit board. Now, generally I find it easier if you start out with putting the mounts and the ICs on, and then soldering on the panel mount parts first, and then move on to the rest of the parts. So take these off. Now when you're putting them on the board, you can see these notches that are silk screened on the board, and that helps you figure out which direction to face them. You want to match the notches, so notch side is the same as the one on the picture, and you want to do the same with the other one. This notch U2 is pointing down, so no. Put them out, pointing down. So generally we want your iron to be heated to at least 700 degrees. We have ours at 750. And get yourself some good solder. So we can put the chips in the mounts a little later. Let's move on to the panel side parts. Now in your bag, you might get the washer and the bolt might be separate. So, you know, if you don't see it on here, make sure you check your bag. Another quick thing is I like to pour things out of the bag into a nice little box. Keeps things from getting lost and makes it easier for me to find them. One of the most important parts is the audio cable, which you'll want to thread through these friction holes so later on it doesn't slip. That should be pretty good. Might be a little too long, but you can always adjust it later. Just putting it back through. So I like to solder the audio cable is one of the first things because the wires are a little thin and they can get in the way a bit later on, so it's just easier to do it. So you want the red and the green wires to go into the positive, which is the top part, J1. And then the copper colored wire will go to the other slot. And with these wires, it's nice to, they're already pre-tinned, but I like to get a little more solder on them before I put them in, and also I like to solder the red and green ones together, keeps them from separating when I'm trying to put it through the hole. So what you want to do is to tin these yourself, and they have an enamel coating on them that makes them difficult to directly solder on, but you can actually remove that enamel through the tinning process, which is by putting a bit of solder on the tip of your soldering iron and just basically going along the length of the wire, and that slowly melts the enamel, and you'll know because then the solder will start to stick to the wire. I mean the wires are red and green because of the enamel coloring. So once the enamel is gone, then solder should stick to the copper. And this is also helpful if these wires ever break off and you need to resolder them onto the board, which really shouldn't happen if you did the stressing. If you put it through the stressing holes in the hammer. Make sure these two wires don't touch each other, even though they're coated with enamel. So, next step, which I think is pretty easy. I think I'll do the resistors. So, Get all the resistors out. There should be about 5 small resistors and also one very, very big resistor. So 6 resistors in total. Let's go ahead and do the small ones. And this is when the instructions page comes in handy. So we're going to see that R1 is 10 ohms, and it's brown, black, black, gold, brown. Should be pretty easy. Let's see. Brown, black, black, gold, brown. Okay. So we need the bits of paper. And R1 is right here. Now the resistors can go in any direction. So just push them through. I like to put all the resistors in before I start soldering them. Just makes it go faster. So the R2 is blue, black, yellow, brown, brown. And we have blue, black, yellow, brown, brown. So that works. R2. R3 is brown, red, black, red, brown. Brown, red, black, red, brown. Perfect. You notice here after I put them in, I like to angle them out a little. Now you don't want them to lie parallel to the board because that makes it difficult to solder, but just a little bit of an angle keeps them in place so they don't fall out, which is great. R4 is brown, green, black, black, brown. So, brown, green, black, black, brown goes to R4. Cool. And last one is R5, but for good measure, it's brown, black, 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 brown, which is brown, this one. And in we go. Great. So let's get started soldering. Now, solder should pretty much melt on contact with the soldering iron. If it's not doing that, then it's either not hot enough or it could possibly be broken. So if that's not working out for you, make sure to check that. And as I was taught, it's the easiest way to get the solder under is you try to mainly heat up the pad and just kind of poke the solder at it until it pulls up and creates a little mountain. That looks good. With your iron. Alright, that looks good. Some people like to clip the wires right after they put them in. You can do it right away. You can do it after you have everything in. Sometimes it's easier if you clip it right away because then you just have more room to solder. But if you're afraid of making mistakes, then it doesn't hurt to leave them on. Alright. Let's see, next we have the and for now let's put the big resistor in. Feels really satisfying. Have the big resistor in there. Makes the thing almost look mostly done. Takes up the most space anyway. Beautiful. Let's move on to putting in the capacitors. I've already put them all in here, but they're pretty much the same as the resistors. They're bidirectional, so it doesn't actually matter what way they're put in. And each of these, when figuring out which one goes where, you're going to want to use a magnifying glass. Or if you have really good eyes, you can just see them. But there's small inscriptions on each of these, and you just match them up to the instructions on the website, which is pretty easy to go off of. Typically you want to put the small ones in. There's also the two larger resistors, which I usually want to save towards the end just because they're bigger and more cumbersome. So, alright, now that they're all in, and let's put them in. Let's solder them on. It should be 4 capacitors. Now let's move on to the diodes and the MOSFET. So D1 here corresponds to this very large diode. Let's take the tape off. Now you'll see on the board a white strip here that's printed onto the board. This is supposed to correspond with this grayish whitish strip on the diode, which indicates the direction that you're supposed to put the diode in. So of course you want to match the gray strip to the direction, put it in the same direction as the white strip here on the board. So it's there. Bend these. should be good. And let's also put this small part on for Q2. Take it out of the wrapping. And as you can see on the drawing on the board, one side is rounded, the other side is a line. So of course you would put this in. How the diagram shows it was the rounded end facing the rounded end and the flat end facing the flat end on Q2. So as you can see, the outline below fits very well with the shape of the part. And you want to angle them all slightly, makes it easier to solder. Let's go ahead and do that. So now we have the MOSFET here. Alright, so you'll get a screw, some nuts, and a washer. That helps you, that you can use to secure the MOSFET. So actually, in addition to the Phillips screwdriver, you also want a flathead, which is helpful for screwing in the MOSFET. Now you want to put the MOSFET pins in, but give you some space and try to eyeball it in so that you can get done that. Put in the screw. Washer on there. Yeah, now you can just use kind of even wire clippers, or even better if you have a wrench to hold it in place and make sure that is screwed on tight. And so once that's soldered on, you'll actually also want to, once that's screwed in, you also want to solder area, and you want to make sure that the MOSFET is connected to the board. Put some solder around the area, and make sure there's electrical contact. Now we're really just left with the big parts. Let's just put those in. Capacitor. You want the white strip pointing towards the negative side, and you can see that because the positive side has a little symbol right here. You want it in like so. Alright. Same with the little smaller black capacitor. You want the positive side going to the positive side, which is the unmarked side, and the negative side is the side with the white strip. Put it in like so. Alright, so that's all the pieces on the board except the potentiometer. Obviously, you'll want the potentiometer facing outside, like so, because it will be mounted in the panel. So, let's do that really quick. Alright, so now that we've soldered all the stuff that's mostly going to be on the board, next step we're going to do the panel parts and also the flyback. So get ready for that. So now this is one of the most important and sometimes difficult part of the assembly process, which is getting the flyback together. After you unbox it and take off some bubble wrap, this is what you should get in your kit. Now you want to keep everything you see on here, even though it's some of them are what seems like extra wiring. Like these brown wires, they will be useful for other connections in the board, especially when soldering to the panel and soldering the panel components together. But first off, what you're going to want to do is free these brown wires, which are extra wires, and they're double insulated, which is both a blessing and a curse. Makes it harder to strip them, but they're also much more durable. So, unhook these wires. You want to leave them on the side. We'll put them to good use later. Now you have the side. Now you have this wire with the giant suction cup. So unravel that. So this is important. Do not cut this wire off at this stem. It is critical that you do not cut this wire. You will need it. It is one of the output wires. But what you do want to do is to cut the suction cup off this wire. So you want to do that, and like so. There goes the suction cup, and that is pretty much useless afterwards. So this bundle of wire, sometimes they're zip tied, sometimes they might not be, but they're zip tied. You want to cut off that zip tie. This bundle of wires here that was actually zip tied together, these wires you can cut, and they'll actually be put to good use later on. So you can start with this wire. They should be white on the flybacks that you're getting, and not the one with the rubber protection seal. Never cut this wire. Let's go ahead and cut off this white wire here, and we'll put the wire to the side and put it to good use later on. You also want to cut this red wire. You're going to cut this wire. And we're also going to cut this gray wire. That was also part of the bundle. Alright. So, first what you're going to want to do actually is you see these two brown wires, which were bundled in with the flyback. You want to get about maybe the same length, measure out the same length, and cut them in half at the halfway point. So now you have two brown wires. Very helpful. And from this view of the flyback, you'll want to solder the two brown wires to the second pin from this second pin and this third pin. So you will want to solder the brown wire, which comes with these nice little heads that attaches directly on to these wires. Sometimes you have to pry the heads open a little, but sooner or later they should be able to clip on like that, and then you'll want to solder it on after you do that. I like to have the one with the pink band on it attached to one end, attached to the second one, and then the one with no markings whatsoever attached to the third. Now let's solder this on. These two brown wires will actually connect to the board, so they are very important. What you want to do next is strip both of these wires. So generally you want to cut maybe about like half an inch, quarter inch, leave about that much space. It really depends how much you like to work with, but that's a reasonable amount. Alright, so now that we've stripped these two wires, they're exposed, which is great, so now they can be attached to the board. And for good measure, let's just clip off all these parts. Now that we're pretty sure they're all in the right places. Once again, if you want to build the whole thing first and then test them out, I am very supportive of that, because after you clip these off, it becomes quite difficult to solder the parts, to resolder the parts elsewhere. So if you are a beginner and if you're not very confident in your skills, then I would sincerely recommend that you leave the clipping for last. But of course you definitely want to clip the parts, because, well, otherwise they'll just get in contact with each other and bad things will happen. Cool. So now let's connect these wires to the board. So the pink one, the one with the pink band, if you followed my instructions, or the second pin coming from going this direction, the wire connected to the second pin on the flyback goes into this hole. The square that's facing that's closer to the panel or potentiometer side of the board. See that? You will want to twist these wires to make them easier to handle, and then that one goes there, and naturally the other one goes into the unmarked one, the one without the pink band, goes into the circle. Should be pretty easy. And there you have it. Now you want to take one of the extra wires. Once you've soldered these parts in, you want to take the extra wire. I usually prefer the white one. It just helps me differentiate it easier. You take this wire, and on this bottom half of the circle, semicircle of pins, you'll want to solder the white one here to the fourth pin. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So you want to solder to this pin here. Because this one doesn't come with a nice little clip, it can be a bit of a pain to solder it on. So once you've managed to solder the wire onto the flyback, it should look something like this. And you'll also want to strip the tip. This one you probably want to strip a little bit more, maybe even 3/4 of an inch. Definitely wouldn't hurt to strip out a little bit more on this, because that is the end that would be screwed in. Okay, so for our next part, we're going to want to connect the switch to the power input plug. And to do this, you're going to want to take a piece of the leftover wire that you cut off from the flyback earlier on. And the first bit we're going to want to connect are these two prongs, or pins. So it's a very short connection, especially if you have it set it up the way I do, which I find is to be the easiest way to have the layout like so, with the power input in a triangle pointing towards the audio stress reliever, and to have the switch put in the switch this way so that it's closer to the power input. So what you want to do is you're going to measure this out, is that right? And I'm going to cut that. For this bit you don't really need the insulation either, so what I'm going to do is connect these two sides together. Like so. There you go. Okay, so now that's bridged, we are going to want to connect all of this to the board. Seems like we've got a bit of audio cable to spare, so pull that through. And then we're going to put the potentiometer in. once you put the potentiometer through the panel hole, you're going to want to screw on the nut and there you go. Pull the rest of my audio cable out, and there, look at that, pretty nice and clean. So now you're going to want to solder the power input and the switch to the board. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to cut off a piece of this wire, and you're going to want to connect these two pins. So you want to thread this wire through both these pins and then into the circular hole on the board. I'll show you. You can do that right now. For this part, you're going to want to strip maybe quarter inch, half an inch of bare wire to make it easier to go through that hole. I'm going to test it. Yep, that should be good. And you're going to want to just get a good approximate measurement for how long it needs to be. So, say about this long is good. A little extra is always better because you don't want to be left with too little wire, then you can't actually reach the board. So I'm gonna cut that. You also want to cut a little longer than the length just so that you can strip a bit on the other end. There you go, and then that end can go into the board. So we're going to put one end through the circular part. Seems like I made it a little too long. We're going to... Fortunately, the input part has holes that you can put this wire right through, which makes it very helpful to keep it in place. So there. Now I've got that in, and then through the hole. Perfect. That's in pretty snug, and we're gonna solder it all together. Generally, I just keep soldering until the hole that in the middle of the pin is basically just covered up with a layer of solder, so I know for sure that there is contact going on. There we go. Then you want to solder the bottom part, bottom hole, to the board, and all done. So you can see we've soldered that in, and it's securely soldered to the power input. Okay, so now we have to connect a switch to the board. So the switch, the other pin that's not being used to connect to the power input is going to connect to the board and into that square piece, into that last remaining square hole. So that's the square pad with a hole in it. Let's see. Once again, you want to take some remainder of your wire. You can also just use other household electrical wires you prefer. I just generally like these because they come in a kit and they're pretty well insulated. So they're double insulated actually, which is pretty nice. Just making sure I have enough exposed wire. To properly connect with the board. Okay, so let's go here and through there. Great. Solder that baby on. Don't want the pins to touch, so I'm just bending that a little just to make sure it's not going to touch the pin that's going across the board. Then solder the end into the board, like so. Fantastic. And here we have basically completed the plasma speaker. Now all that's left to do is to So we're going to first test this out just to see if we got everything right before we put it in the box and find out that it's not working the way we want it to. So we're going to, nice helping hand here is going to hold these wires together for us. And so I forgot one last step, so I'm going to unplug the power supply, and I forgot to put the chips in. So if you make that mistake, it's okay. So let's see. We're going to want to put the LM, the one that says LM386N-4. You also see this in your instructions. So we're going to want to put this in. And you're going to want the side with the notch on it pointing the same side as the notch on the little mounting thing. Be careful when you're putting these things in, as if you're too rough with them, sometimes the pins bend in and not all of them make contact. So That looks good. And the other one, and you just match up the notch. That looks good as well. Alright, let's turn this on. Plug our power in. And voila! Ladies and gentlemen, we have a working plasma speaker. Alright, so now that we have our plasma speaker finished, we're going to put everything in the case that we have, the enclosure. Just make sure you peel off all the transfer paper that comes with your kit. Alright, so here we have all the pieces we need. So first thing actually is what you'll want to do is push these nuts into the slots that we have cut out in these four panels. So this is so that it'll be easy. This is so that it'll be easier after you have these all pushed in, so that the screw can access it. And something to help you push it in is always nice. Alright, so now that we have this part done, the rest of it should be relatively easy. Make sure that your board is mostly perpendicular, even with the panel. This just makes things a little easier when you're So one thing you want to do after you figured out everything's working and you are ready to put it in your case, you want to snip these remaining extruding pins that you're not using off from the flyback. They can potentially cause problems down the road, so it's better that we're just gone. Now that we've done that, let's try to put this in a comfortable position, like so. And we're going to have the white wire come out here. And if you have too much of it, you can always cut some of it off. But for now, we're going to let it come out from this side. And then the red wire will come out from the opposite side. Doesn't particularly matter which wire comes from which side. So it's really up to your preference or whatever is most comfortable for your flyback. So let's now put this panel in. And just, checking your case, make sure your wires aren't mashed up too badly against each other so that you won't get any shorts. So now for this part, let's see. We do have quite a bit of extra, so I am going to cut off about this much from the white wire. And I'm going to strip it. Looks good. And take off a bit from our red wire. And we're going to strip it. Fantastic. Alright, so you're going to want to take these screws that are included in your kit. You want to sort of wrap the wire just a little bit around the screw, or just so that it shows through a little. Well, first, actually what's really easy is you stick the wire through the hole, and then you simply just screw it in. And this is so that that wire is connected to the screw. You want to do maybe about halfway. Looks about good. And the next one, the red one, we're going to do the same thing. Just going to push it through.